Thank you everyone for coming out this afternoon on another beautiful Michigan afternoon. As we begin every program here at the Silversides, if you are able, please stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. We're delighted to have such a wonderful speaker and such a brilliant author to be able to give this presentation. The mission of the USS Silversides is simply to honor our veterans, and we do it with pizzazz whenever it's possible. This is a photo of our Lost Boat ceremony from several years ago. Everyone knows about how we preserve our history here. We do that in preserving our vessels, as well as the artifacts that we have collected that tell the story of the soldiers, so for people to understand and to better understand our veterans. We allow people to explore history firsthand. It's wonderful to read about something, it's wonderful to hear about something, but when you actually have the opportunity to walk where people have walked, to see their living conditions, to hear their stories, you get a better understanding for that. And that is one of the ways that we honor our veterans. We also educate. As you're here today, we are part of one of our programs. We do 25 lectures every year on military history starting in September, and they go to Thanksgiving, and then we start again in the spring, and we go until the end of April. Those are wonderful topics, all relating to different aspects of military history. This fall, we will be having our newest lecture series. It will be on the Vietnam conflict, and that'll start the Monday after Labor Day, and it'll go to the Monday of Thanksgiving week. In the springtime, we will be doing, our lecture series will focus on World War II in the Pacific. In addition to our adult education classes where we do military history, we also run a STEM program. Our STEM program, we find that young people that have had the opportunity to take STEM classes and then are taken out to our vessels, they have a better understanding and a better grasp of what it is, and they're much more engaged as they go forward on each of those. We offer many classes every year on different aspects. The one that you're looking at here is a class on submersible remotely operated vehicles. The students are given an explanation of how a submarine works, and then they are asked with a bucket of parts to put together an ROV that can not only sink, but also come back to the top, that can reach buoyancy, can move backwards, forwards, and side to side.
Wow.
And they do that, and it's a wonderful experience to see children being so engaged. And then when you take them out onto the vessel, they're like, wow, there's no windows out here. And you really, really want to get your submariners back up from the bottom of the ocean. And it makes a much more engaging experience for them and brings everything to life. This summer, we are proud to have a new series. It's called Veterans Peer View. These are topics of interest specifically to veterans. We have been, our first lecture was on June 30th, earlier this year, and today we are so excited to have Brett Allen here to talk about his book, Kilroy Was Here. And next week, we will have an organization called WINK speaking. It's an organization that was started here in Muskegon. And their mission is very simple, is to assist women veterans in their transition back to civilian life and to deal with some of their unique problems that they face. It'll be a very engaging conversation, and we hope that any of you that are here will be able to join us. And if you have friends, please bring friends. If you're not able to join us in person, please ask for the Zoom link, and we'll be very happy to send it to you. And Lorraine Rodriguez will be our speaker for that one, and we're truly looking forward to that one as well. Today's presentation is someone that I've been very excited ever since I read the book and couldn't put it down. It was extraordinary, it was insightful, it was funny, it was everything that you could want in a wonderful book. And the person that wrote it is even more wonderful. So without further ado, I will introduce Brett Allen, today's speaker, on his book, Kilroy Was Here. Thank you. bottom, TJ, the second PowerPoint. At the very bottom of the screen, it's open. All right, there you go. From beginning.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Brett Allen. Welcome to my TED Talk. I am a West Michigan native and a U.S. Army veteran, and I'm here to speak with you today about my first novel, Kilroy Was Here, which is based loosely on my experience in Afghanistan in 2009. Today, I'll be talking mostly about the book, but also my journey after leaving the Army and how I ended up on stage talking to you all today. So before we get started, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. You can't see this elephant. He is entirely my elephant. There are many elephants like him, but this one is mine. His name is Anxiety, and he is the product of several key life events, which I will explain now. Event number 1, 5th grade, language arts class, Daisy Brook Elementary School. I was assigned to give an oral book report in front of an entire class in the format of a reporter interviewing the story's main character. In an effort to make the report more entertaining, I attempted to interject humor into the back and forth. It did not go well. With every joke, my classmates stared at me in muted bewilderment. My dream of being a stand-up comedian was crushed. I like to think this was the birthplace of my anxiety elephant. Event number 2, spring 2002 senior studies class, Fremont High School. I'd written a 20-page senior thesis on the subject of total war and its effects on the 20th century. The research paper then had to be presented in front of the class in a 20-minute presentation. I made it 11 minutes into the speech before my vision tunneled and my words began to slur. The teacher stopped me, commented on the delightful shade of green I had turned, and excused me from the room to get some water in the hall. Event number 3, October 15, 2005. And Linda, you'll remember this. My brother's wedding. 5 minutes into the ceremony, I'm told I went to a knee and was then caught by one of my fellow groomsmen before hitting my head on the altar rail. Yeah. I do not recall this. I do not recall this, but my suit was drenched in sweat and I had a knot on my head, so I'm inclined to believe it was true. Since then, I have delivered numerous operations orders, work presentations. Can everybody still hear me?
Yeah. It's better with the microphone, I think.
Yeah, I'll go grab the other one. You can keep talking with that one and I'll grab the other one.
Since then, I've delivered numerous operations orders, work presentations, and 3 best man speeches. I've contemplated faking my death before each one of these. But I'm not looking for sympathy. I tell you all this for 2 reasons. I hope that by addressing this up front, by looking it in the eye and laughing at it, I can shrink the elephant into something more manageable. And 2, I thought the front row should be aware, but there's nobody here to catch me if I take a dive. So there it is. I've given the power over to you, the audience, so please save any heckling or booing to the end.
Oh, good. Maybe that'll help.
All right.
See if that's better.
That should be better. Yep. So I thought I'd start out with a background.
That's better.
As I mentioned, I'm a West Michigan native. I was born and raised in Fremont, about a half hour from here. I had a pretty normal upbringing, no major traumatizing events, save for the ones that I just mentioned. I have one older brother. He and I were pretty involved in the competitive archery scene between the ages of 8 and 14. So if you followed indoor and outdoor competitive recurve archery in the mid to late 90s, you may have heard of me. I suspect you didn't, and you haven't. I was a member of the Fremont cross country team and served as the team captain my junior and senior year. On September 11, 2001, I was sitting in my senior studies class when one of the office assistants came into the room and told our teacher that a plane had just crashed into the World Trade Center. Like most other people, we assumed that it had been an accident, but when the news came of the second plane in the Pentagon, we knew it was no mistake. I don't much recall the emotions of the days that follow, outside of a mixture of anger and numbness. I'd been accepted to Michigan State for the next fall, but gave serious thought to joining the Army or Marines. My grandpa had been a Darby's Ranger in World War II, and his service had inspired me. It didn't help that Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers were recently on my radar, so I was very much considering enlisting, but my parents asked me to get some college in first and then make a decision, so I conceded.
Yeah.
After high school, I attended Michigan State, where I majored in changing my major. I switched majors 7 times in the first 2 years I was there. I went from advertising to packaging to engineering arts, which that one required calculus, so that was out. Then I went to history, marketing, building, construction management, and finally I landed on supply chain management because it was the last thing left that I could still get out in 4 years with. So in between each one of those, I considered an education degree, but I never ended up going that route. In 2003, the US invaded Iraq, and I sat in my dorm room and watched men and women my age go across the threshold to war. As I waffled about my future, I couldn't shake the why them and not me feeling. Why should these other guys and girls my age be sent off to fight while I sit here safe? My parents could tell I was on edge. I considered dropping out of school and enlisting, but my dad came across an accelerated 2-year Army ROTC program at Michigan State. Army ROTC is Reserve Officer Training Corps, for those who don't know. The program consisted of a month-long condensed basic training at Fort Knox, and then the remaining 2 years of ROTC as I finished my degree. I convinced a friend from high school who was also at State to join with me. He is still on active duty as a major now. We interviewed and were both lucky enough to each receive an ROTC scholarship as well as an Army Airborne School slot for that summer. On May 6, 2006, I graduated from Michigan State and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Armor Branch of the U.S. Army. I left 2 weeks later for Armor Officer Basic course, again at Fort Knox, Kentucky, where I learned the ins and outs of armored warfare. To this day, driving, commanding, and firing the main gun of an Abrams tank is one of the coolest things I've ever done. I originally had orders to go to an airborne cavalry squadron in the 173rd Airborne Brigade out of Schweinfurt, Germany. For those that aren't familiar with Army culture, this was like a dream assignment for any new second lieutenant. It was a pretty elite unit and one of the first airborne paratrooper cavalry units. But true to form, nothing in the Army is guaranteed. A few weeks into Officer Basic, all 4 lieutenants who had orders to that squadron were redirected to other places because the unit there had been fast-tracked for deployment, and they didn't want to have new lieutenants come in and then have to train them up. I was reassigned to stay at Fort Knox as an executive officer for a basic training unit. Not exactly glamorous work. It's pretty much the inverse of what my original orders were. When you think about Fort Knox, what do you think of? Gold, right? Gold, huge fortress, lots of security, but we got no part in all of that. You basically, when you're driving down Dixie Highway, you can see it from the road, and that's about as close as you'll ever get. There are rumors that they've got UFOs there, not gold, but that's a different presentation. I took several things from my job as a basic training XO. Number 1, drill sergeants, though terrifying on the receiving end, are some of the funnest and funniest people you'll ever meet in your life. I still keep in contact with many of them to this day. And number 2, this is more of a general management lesson. 90% of your time as a manager of people will be spent with 10% of your problem workers. This manifested itself as AWOL soldiers, broken soldiers, and soldiers who discovered very quickly that they weren't cut out for soldiering.
Yeah.
The third thing I took away was a torn ACL. In my last month at Fort Knox, I participated in Spur Ride, which is a cavalry initiation, where participants earn a coveted pair of silver spurs, by competing in a grueling 48 hours of physical, tactical, and technical tests. The last event was an urban combat scenario where I had to carry a simulated injured teammate out of a building. The guy was about my size and wearing full body armor. I had hoisted him up into a fireman carry, and as I stepped from the building, my knee buckled in a way God didn't intend. And I was on the ground pretty quick. I spent the rest of the spur ride on crutches, but I still got my spurs. The Army doctors ordered x-rays and told me that my knee bones were fine. So it would be another 6 months later that an Army doctor at a completely different post would order an MRI and find my ACL was completely severed. My next orders were to Fort Drum, New York, which is essentially located in the western Michigan of western New York State. The only difference being that Fort Drum gets the cumulative snowfall effects of 5 Great Lakes instead of just 1. So at Fort Drum, I was assigned as a platoon leader with Cherokee Troop 371 Cavalry, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 10th Mountain Division, the Titans. If you've ever read Jake Tapper's book, The Outpost, 371 Cav was the unit that originally set up Cop Keating that eventually became the subject matter for the book and for the movie that just came out. Some of the guys that Jake Tapper actually interviewed for that book became very good friends of mine as they were still in the unit when I got there. But the job of platoon leader was the most fun I had had in the Army, but unfortunately only lasted 6 months. In June of 2008, the aforementioned knee injury had to be fixed, and the knee surgery landed me on a staff job in the squadron headquarters office. We had been training up for deployment to Iraq for several months, but as the U.S. began to come out of the surge in 2007, our orders were changed to Afghanistan. In Army timeline, it was a pretty abrupt change. We got our orders to change came in August. We ended up deploying in December. So there's a lot of moving pieces that have to be planned for. So we spent a lot of long nights in the squadron headquarters planning, replanning the squadron's logistic movements from Fort Drum to Manas Air Force Base in Kyrgyzstan, to Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan, and then finally a ground movement from Bagram to our forward operating base, FOB Altamir, in the Logar province south of Kabul. So as luck would have it, my plane touched down in Afghanistan on Christmas Day 2008, and this is where Kilroy Was Here picks up. I won't talk much about the deployment. I don't want to ruin any surprises in the book. Like the main character, Lieutenant Rye, I was originally supposed to serve as a battle captain for our squadron, but once we were on the ground, my squadron leadership decided they needed a dedicated officer to coordinate air operations, and I was assigned as the air planner for all aerial combat and logistics operations concerning our squadron. So I never worked with helicopters before, so when I was abruptly told this, I asked politely how and where I was supposed to learn how to plan air missions on the fly, pun intended. Our operations sergeant major pointed across Bagram to where 2 Apache helicopters were landing off in the distance. Go ask those guys about it, he told me. So I did, and I learned on the fly, and I screwed up, and I succeeded, and it was a very weird year. But it wasn't just weird because of my new job. There were lots of things, both within our unit and within Afghanistan as a whole, that provided enough head-scratching bewilderment that I clearly remember telling friends, no one would ever believe this if I wrote a book about it.
Yeah, that's right.
So in 2009, this was the year Bo Bergdahl, if you're all familiar, walked off his base in the province right next to ours. This affected operations for months afterwards. This made my job especially difficult as our air support was being pulled away from our missions to perform search and rescue missions, and the lack of air support increased the risk for soldiers conducting ground missions and also stretched thin the supplies of our most austere outposts where they were entirely dependent on aerial resupplies. 2009 was also the year of the second ever Afghanistan presidential elections, which gained worldwide notoriety from its corruption and low voter turnout. And it was also the year the Outpost, now a major motion picture, the Kop Keating that I talked about earlier was overrun in the Nuristan province. You'll see bits and pieces of some of these events woven into the pages of Kilroy's here. All right, so I thought I'd give you guys a little bit of a photo tour here. This is from Officer Basic Course. That was my tank crew in the upper right side. I lived with those guys for quite a bit of the time. As you can see down here, Fort Knox, Kentucky is made up entirely of red clay. We had an 11-day field training exercise where we lived on that tank. We ate on the tank, we slept on the tank. It was day and night. And I remember coming home the first day after the exercise and taking a shower, and I just had red clay pouring out of my hair into the drain. So.
God.
This is when we first arrived at Bagram Air Force Base. You can see that's a view of across the tarmac where we landed. These two green tents are the transient tents, which are referenced in the book that we lived in. Most of these pictures will be to help kind of give you a visual for when you do, if you've read the book or when you do read the book. A lot of these places have a special place in my heart. So this was my room in Afghanistan for a year.
Oh my God.
And this was, I'll admit it, officers got a better deal most of the time. And we were in, they call them hard stand buildings, but basically anything that wasn't a tent. So I was on the top bunk. What you can't see is there's cracks in the ceiling where chunks of concrete would fall when they started shooting the artillery pieces at night, which was quite often. So as you can see, it's not wonderful conditions, but it could have been a lot worse. That was my roommate there. He was on the night shift as a battle captain. He got stuck there after I got taken off that shift, so we never really saw each other except for like 5 minutes a day. And this is a view looking south from our FOB in FOB Altamer. This mountain ridge here we dubbed Mount Crumpet, where the Grinch lives. So as you can see, a lot of people when they think of Afghanistan, they think desert, they think arid. The weather where we were was pretty much spot on temperature-wise to here in Michigan. So we got harsh winters, we had pretty hot summers, and then the spring and fall were usually pretty wet. So here are just a couple more pictures. These tents, some of them were living tents, some of them, one was a medic station, one was where you go to use the internet, there was a workout one. And yeah, I kind of had to memorize which ones were where because they all looked exactly the same, as you can see from this picture. So this was a Afghan National Police outpost. We visited here one day to do traffic stops. So there's me pretending to look important, like I'm actually doing something. This was actually just one of those missions where they let a stupid planning officer come along for the ride just so he didn't go crazy sitting inside all the time. This is what we referred to as jingle trucks. So over in that area of the world, I'm pretty sure it's when someone owns their own vehicle, they like to decorate it with really extravagant colors, and these along the front bumper here are all like chains of beads, so the trucks jingle as they roll along. And then not as colorful, but this is what we referred to as Jingle Air, which you'll see referenced in the book. It's basically any contracted air support that we got. Most of the contracted pilots that we had were ex-Russian military, and they used their old military helicopters to help us out in our missions. And this was part of my job. So I ran the airfield on FOB Altamer, and I had a crew of guys that helped me with resupply missions. You can see he's sitting on the load that's going to be picked up. The helicopter hovers directly overhead. You hook up the hook. There's a hook on the bottom side of the helicopter. Then you jump down and run away as they fly off. And you're really putting a lot of faith into the pilot. A, that they haven't been drinking vodka all morning, and B, that the helicopter is not going to like rattle apart above you. And this was, we did the same thing with Army Air. It was always a little less stressful when we were using our own aircraft. And things usually went quicker because they could take more weight. So you can see down here these big balls that they're hooking to the thing. Those are fuel bladders. So those are all full of gasoline, which adds a nice layer of paranoia when you're sitting under there hooking them to the bottom of a helicopter hovering inches over your head. So I participated as much as I could in hooking up the loads on the bottom of the helicopter, just because I'm of the school that you never ask people to do something you're not willing to do yourself. So here's more proof that I was actually there. So this is a picture on the airfield. They let me again come out and play soldier. We were on the mortar range, so I got to shoot some mortars off. And then the fellow here on the right side, he is Micah Bushhouse. He is the one who joined ROTC with me. By chance would have it, he was passing through Bagram at the same time I was coming back from leave, so we got to spend some time together, a little reunion on the other side of the world. So, and then in the upper right-hand corner, if you can see on the desk, there is a picture of a woman there. That is Barbara Streisand. So our S1 officer, which is essentially our HR rep for the squadron, he passed his free time by writing to random celebrities in the name of other people in the squadron. So I, out of the blue one day, received a package from Barbara Streisand with a note thanking me for being such a great fan. We had our operations sergeant major was a guy who was about as close to being a G.I. Joe as you could possibly get. He had the flat top and just a real gruff guy. And he received photos of all 3 of the living Golden Girls and decorated his office with them. So. And then, so this is a little bit harder to see, but this is the valley we were in when my truck hit an IED towards the end of our deployment. I was out on a tactical resupply mission. We had a truck, I don't know if you can see the trailer is still flipped over, but a contracted local national truck that was in the rear of the formation ended up rolling because the roads are so narrow down here. And we spent hours trying to right the vehicle back up and get the load back up. And as soon as we did, it was getting towards dusk, and we started rolling out and made it about 20 meters before my truck hit an IED, disabled the truck. Fortunately, no one in the truck was majorly hurt. We had one guy with a separated shoulder and a concussion, but it pretty much brought the convoy to a standstill, and we ended up having to turn back. But it prompted a couple chapters in the book, so I thought it was worth mentioning and giving you a visual on what that area looked like. And then another key place in the book is a place called Cap Kurwar, which I based on this outpost. So when we first got there, the southern portion of our province was very remote, and not a lot of U.S. forces had been down there yet. So it became our mission to make a footprint there, and this abandoned schoolhouse here ended up serving that purpose. We turned it into an outpost, which then that was what a lot of my aerial resupply missions that I ran were in support of getting these guys food and water, because the route you saw on the previous slide was pretty much the only trafficable route into that district, and you're only able to do it in good weather conditions because the roads were so bad. And then I just put this because I thought this was a pretty neat scene here. You can kind of see that little square up there. That's what you're looking at from there. And then this was the glorious last day on FOB Altimer. So these pictures were taken as we were waiting on the airfield to fly out of there. Ironically, the squadron from the 173rd Airborne came and relieved us from Bob Altimer. So if I wouldn't have been there in 2009, I would have been there in 2010. But these guys on the bottom were part of my crew for most of the time there. And then in the upper right-hand corner, you can see everybody loading onto the Freedom Bird, as we called it, to head back to Bagram Air Force Base and then back to the U.S. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, Kilroy Was Here follows a young cavalry officer, Lieutenant Jared Rye, as he navigates a year-long deployment in the rural province, or the Logar province of Afghanistan in 2009. The novel is not your typical war novel. Most war novels covering the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq fall into two main types: shoot 'em ups, action, tactical, heroic stories, or the broken soldier stories, which center around the effects of PTSD. Both of these types of stories are important to tell, and both speak to people differently. Both offer truths about the soldier's experience, but my book is neither. My book is a dark comedy and captures a side of the war that you rarely see, the absurd side. And it's a tribute to all the behind-the-scenes soldiers who keep the big green machine rolling along. It's not without its own truths, though. The absurdities of a bureaucratic military, the effects of complacency in a war zone, the effects of hypervigilance on the psyche, and the things that soldiers do to pass the endless hours which separate episodes of extreme violence. If you've ever seen the movie Office Space, think that, but at war. As I state in the beginning of the book, I did not write this to make light of the veteran experience or to cheapen it in any way. I wrote this to show that veterans are all human, and we should all be measured accordingly. So has anyone seen the Kilroy Was Here logo before this? You're all familiar with that? A lot of people don't know the backstory, so I'll kind of give you that and why I chose it. Before I get into the book, I'll explain the origin. The phrase Kilroy Was Here and the accompanying face hanging over the wall with the fingers coming over the wall dates back to the days of World War II and is famous for being a graffiti tag left by American GIs all over the European and Pacific theaters. The origin of the graffiti has never been confirmed, but there is one generally accepted backstory. During World War II, ships were being assembled in large shipyards at an incredible rate to support the war effort. At one of these major shipyards in Quincy, Massachusetts, there was a shipyard inspector by the name of James J. Kilroy. One of James Kilroy's primary duties was to count the rivets placed by the workers on a given day, because the workers were paid by the number of rivets they placed. This was done by making a chalk mark where the rivets ended each day so that the next day's rivets could be counted from that point. Some dishonest workers would erase the marks and place them farther back to take credit for a previous day's work. James Kilroy put an end to this by writing "Kilroy Was Here" above where he had ended counting each day. Because the ships were being hurried through production, most of their interiors were not painted before going into service. So GIs being transported across the ocean to war began seeing the message "Kilroy Was Here" in the hulls of these large transport ships. They had no idea who Kilroy was, but the message stuck, and soldiers began leaving the message everywhere they went. There were many accounts of soldiers finding "Kilroy Was Here" in places where they thought U.S. soldiers had not previously been, leaving them to wonder how it had gotten there. It's even rumored that news of Kilroy made it to Hitler, who thought Private Kilroy was a spy who had infiltrated behind their lines. But Kilroy Was Here did not end in World War II, and the famous face was reported to have shown up in other wars, such as the Korean War, Vietnam War, and most recently in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I got some examples of some of the Kilroy Was Here stuff that you see around. Some of it's just recreations, but just some examples of it painted on a tank. Even Bugs Bunny. I mean, it's been everywhere. I follow a couple graffiti artists on Instagram entirely for that reason. Sometimes they'll send me specific ones where they found Kilroy Was Here that's been painted recently around. So I chose this phrase for my title because I felt it really embodied the message of the book. Kilroy Was Here was a simple way for a soldier to literally leave his mark on the battlefield of other countries. In the book, Lieutenant Rye struggles to find a way to leave his own mark on the war in Afghanistan. A war that by 2009 already felt stagnant and lacking clear direction. Rye, having been trained as a combat officer, has been relegated to a desk job and must grapple with the fact that he'll never put his training into action, never experience the exhilaration of combat, or stand stoically while the president drapes a Medal of Honor around his neck. But through a growing friendship with his interpreter, he begins to realize that the way we treat those around us can have a much greater impact than bombs and bullets ever could. So this next part of the speech, I'm sure everyone here knows a veteran, is a veteran or knows a veteran. So this is mainly directed at that. I chose this Leave the Mark theme partially because I felt it would be relatable to veterans and civilians alike. We all desire to be impactful, to be do great things, win awards, receive accolades for jobs well done. But I also chose the theme because I felt it might particularly resonate with veterans who are transitioning out of the military or who are already out and struggling to find a way to leave their mark. It's no secret that depression runs rampant in the veteran community. Suicide rates are astronomical. A study conducted recently by Brown University found that over 4 times the number of service members or veterans have died by suicide than by military operations in the post 9/11 conflicts, with estimates of over 30,000 service member or veteran suicides. It's heartbreaking, and what's worse is I fear there's a dramatic misunderstanding of causes in most cases. When we hear about veteran suicides, it's often talked about in conjunction with PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or at least that's where our minds automatically go. We think this person must have seen some horrible things at war, or they couldn't cope with what they've witnessed, the friends they lost, or the traumas they've endured. What we don't hear about, and what people don't talk about much, is the depression associated with separation from service. If you served in the military, you know it's more than a job. It's a way of life. A world unto its own. So much so that when you're in, you make the distinction, often referring to regular life as the civilian world, like it's an alien landscape. For the fully integrated, coming out of military life into the civilian world can be jarring, as evident by how long it takes veterans to stop saying things like Roger, to affirm any question, or using radio comms and jargon or acronyms in everyday situation. It's not just speaking differently though. You're expected to act differently too, joke differently, approach problems more gently. It's hard, and it requires a complete rewiring of the brain. And things that you'd become, the identity you'd anchored yourself to that was so admired by family and friends must be all but abandoned. The shedding of this self creates a vacuum for which many veterans are unprepared. If I'm no longer this, then what am I? What should I be? I personally struggled with this when I got out. I struggled to find meaningful work that I felt compared to the level of responsibility bestowed upon me in the Army. I held the silly notion that my time as an officer would equate to management-related work experience, but I quickly learned it held little to no value without technical experience in any given industry. I first tried my hand in the finance world, but the role I had as a financial advisor turned out to be mostly just sales of investments, for which I cared nothing about. Turns out it takes passion to sell, and I did not hold any passion for mutual funds or municipal bonds.
Yeah.
After that, I interviewed for several logistics jobs, finally landing an entry-level position as a buyer at a locally headquartered food distributor. It wasn't my dream job, but it was a good job with good people. And it was a solid foundation to operate from. But I still often found myself bouncing my head off my desk, and the waves of depression rolled in a lot, usually in conjunction with the hoorah corporate meetings or the corny team building exercises middle managers like to pride themselves on. I couldn't shake the lack of purpose. I had an unwillingness to be happy, and I didn't want a cubicle to become my legacy. I'd been brainstorming Kilroy on and off for a few years by then. But it was about this time I started writing it in earnest. At first, I just sat down and wrote. I'd write whatever popped into my idiotic brain to fill the page, thinking I'll edit most of this out later. I began to read a lot more, both books on writing techniques and fiction with the intent of studying the style of other writers. I discovered genres and styles I'd never read before, and my writing began to improve. I began to notice the waves of depression receding whenever I'd make progress in the book. I'd also notice that them pouring on harder when I'd slack off. But they became easier and easier to overcome as my brain began to wrap around the notion that maybe this writing thing could be my new purpose. Maybe I could create something that would bring people joy. It was still difficult though. Between my wife and I, our full-time jobs and having 2 young children, the chances to write were usually limited to when everyone else in the house was asleep. So progress was frustratingly slow. About 4 years ago, I had a stroke of good fortune though. My best friend had a paralegal position open up in his law firm, which he needed to fill immediately. The pay was similar, and with the added understanding that I'd be able to write whenever I was not engaged in firm business. I took the job, and it's probably the only reason I'm standing up here right now. Without the opportunity, I'd still be working my way through the 2nd draft, but instead I'm halfway through the 3rd draft of my next book. To steal a phrase from Matthew McConaughey, it was a green light. So I still have a long way to go. I'm not there yet as an author, but I'm trying to move the football forward every day, and I'm slowly finding a way to leave my mark. If you're a veteran or you know a veteran, or anyone really, who is fighting or struggling with depression, transition, or reconstructing of oneself, I implore you to talk about it or talk to them. Address the elephant in the room or in their head. What's the old joke? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So start taking bites. I'm not a psychologist, but here are a few things that I found helpful along my path. Number 1, hold on to discipline. If there's one thing the military forced upon us that is worth its weight in gold, it's discipline. Retain it, or if you've lost it, fight to regain it. I still get up every day at 5 a.m. to work out, and by 6:30, I've accomplished something before most people have left their pillow. It takes about 2 weeks to build or rebuild the habit, but you'll be happy you did. Get a foothold, but don't get comfortable. This is mainly for those in transition. It's okay to take a job or position that isn't your first choice, as long as you keep driving forward. Having financial stability will help alleviate anxiety and allow you time to regroup, devise, and execute a plan. No job is beneath you if you use it as a means of self-improvement. Find a hobby and pour yourself into it. If you hate your job, start working your way out of it. It may take a couple of years. I've been at it for over a decade, but sometimes you have to play the long game on happiness. Find something you're passionate about and become a fanatic. Learn everything you can. Practice it, take risks. If you get good at it, you never know what can parlay into a new job or a new career, or at least fulfilling side gig. Use your discipline to get you there. Disconnect. Cut bad habits. Sever or restrict the toxic activities in your life that hinder forward movement. Put a cap on the amount of TV you watch, the hours of video games you play, the number of times you check Facebook or Twitter, or the number of nights you drink a beer. These things are all designed to eat your time, your mental bandwidth, and your energy. Number 5, connect. Give back, be involved in your community. This is something I still struggle with. Authors usually are known introverts, hence the irrational fear of public speaking. But being ingrained in your community can help to replace lost feelings of camaraderie from the military, as well as help you understand your fellow man. And finally, read my book, of course, but also others. Make it a point to read books you know nothing about, or books you know about but may have preconceived notions about. Read things out of your comfort zone. Seek points of view that are different from yours. It's surprising how often discomfort leads to growth. We live in a world of constant noise. Social media has created a look-at-me society where it's often impossible to tell what is true or false or photoshopped or filtered or deepfaked. Leaving your mark can be difficult when so many others are trying to leave theirs. Stay focused and stay disciplined, but most importantly, just stay. The world is a lot better with you in it. And I should have hit this a little earlier, but here's one last slide for the Kilroy things. This is actually at the World War II monument in Washington, D.C., so it's like hidden in a far corner.
Yeah.
Is that like engraved into the wall there?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love it.
So here are the bullet points of the things I just talked about. So you keep up with my slide. And so, sorry if it got a little dark there for a minute. I promise the book is a comedy. It's received gracious comparisons to Joseph Heller's Catch-22 and the TV series is MASH and Hogan's Heroes. So to lighten things up, I thought I'd read an excerpt from the book. I'll just choose a short one here. So this is from the end of chapter 2. The outer loop. The inside perimeter of Bagram's outside fences made a nice 8-mile running loop if you're into that sort of thing. Captain Clark and I sloshed swiftly across the rutted, muddy road. We'd spent the majority of the afternoon acquiring a truck from a surly government contractor who felt it was his sworn sacred duty to be the defender of the civilian motor pool. We finally convinced him that our need was legitimate, but I suspect he gave us a lemon anyway. Captain Clark then suggested we take a break, which according to him, we were doing by running in the snowy cold. I stared off the chain link fence, huffing and puffing as I bitterly analyzed the years of poor life choices I had made that led me to be here on this miserable run. Beyond the fence was a dingy brown moonscape of rocks and rubble as far as the eye could see. There was absolutely no vegetation. Occasionally, we would pass the distant ruins of some mud structure that could have been as ancient as Alexander the Great or as recent as the Soviet occupation. Up ahead, a herd of raw-boned goats caught my attention. They were tripping along over the rubble just outside the fence. Beyond them, in the hollow of another clay ruin, an old man and a young boy hopped lightly from rock to rock, following the direction of the herd. The man's gray beard did little to hide the scowl on his sun-weathered face, and he used his walking stick to take vicious swipes at the boy when he got too far ahead. They paid no attention to us as we approached, and even less attention to their goats. They could not have been more than 20 feet from the fence. What's to keep them from lobbing a grenade over the fence, I asked as we ran. Arthritis and a lack of arm strength, said Captain Clark, pointing to the old man and then the boy. No, seriously, why did they allow them to get so close? See those guard towers? Captain Clark pointed to one of the wooden box structures that lined the fence. There had been one every 100 meters along the way, because each one of those contains less than 2 maladjusted GED-carrying disgruntled privates with an M240 Bravo machine gun just looking for an excuse to shoot something. I was suddenly more worried about the towers than I was the shepherds. The old man and the boy were now behind us, and I checked over my shoulder to make sure neither was throwing anything. Look at it this way, Clark continued. What would them attacking us gain? They'd be dead in seconds. Best case scenario for them, they'd kill 2 useless planning officers. I was mad that I was a useless planning officer and that I was dead in anyone's best case scenario. I should be out there, I said, looking off through the fence again. Herding goats, Captain Clark asked. You know what I mean. I should have a platoon, be running missions, helping the locals, making a difference. Herding goats, Captain Clark affirmed. You'll have the SCO's attention tomorrow. You should tell him how you feel. He loves to hear about feelings. Maybe I will, I said. I turned my head for one last look at the shepherds and was just in time to see the old man's cane connect crisply with the poor boy's skull, sending him reeling into the rubble among the goats. Just be careful what you wish for, man, huffed Clark. A truck rounded the corner ahead, and we both jammed our mouth guards back in. You might not realize how good you have it, he gobbled. So there you have it. That's what you're in for. If you pick up a copy, Kilroy was here. I'm pretty sure I'm on the right side. So actually, no, I'm not. So you may not know this, but 25% of anything that I end up earning at Kilroy was here will be donated to veterans charities. I've chosen 2 charities in particular, Team Red, White, and Blue, or Team RWB specifically being the Grand Rapids chapter of the charity. I'll just read you their mission statement here real quick. Every year, more than 250,000 active duty service members transition out of the military, joining the 3.5 million post 9/11 veterans already living in communities nationwide. They face many challenges, including isolation, weight gain, lack of purpose, and other health issues. Team Red, White, and Blue is the antidote to the isolation and health challenges they face. By forging America's leading health and wellness community for veterans, service members, and their families, we strive to make tomorrow better. Together, we will find strength and success. Our chapters and the Team RWB app deliver virtual and local, consistent and inclusive opportunities for veterans and the communities to connect through physical and social activity. Veterans host regular fitness activities, social gatherings, and community service events, and facilitate building strong local connections and with members and organizations within the community. So the second one is the Gary Sinise Foundation. For those of you who don't know Gary Sinise, he played Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, but he's been a huge veteran supporter. He actually used to tour around the bases in Afghanistan with his band called the Lieutenant Dan Band. So I'll read you the mission statement for them. At the Gary Sinise Foundation, we serve our nation by honoring our defenders, veterans, first responders, their families, and those in need. We do this by creating and supporting unique programs designed to entertain, educate, inspire, strengthen, and build communities. They accomplish this through a variety of programs aimed at the physical and mental health of veterans and first responders. One of their main programs is called RISE, which stands for Restoring Independence, Supporting Empowerment. Through this program, they build mortgage-free, specially adapted smart homes for severely wounded veterans and first responders, as well as providing home modifications, mobility devices, and adapted vehicles to our injured, wounded, ill, and aging veterans. So before I conclude and open it up for questions, I just want to acknowledge two groups or two people real quick. So the cover art that you can kind of see in the background and you saw on the first slide, that was done by another veteran, another friend of mine from the Michigan State Army ROTC. He served in Iraq. I believe he did one tour in 2007 with the 101st Airborne Division. But he's a great artist, and I've commissioned him on a couple of different projects to do cover work for me. He wished to remain anonymous, though, so I won't say that. The other group is my publisher. A15 Publishing was created by retired Air Force Colonel Pete Donnelly and is a veteran-owned and operated publishing house. They focus primarily on veteran authors and authors related to veterans. Their sole focus is to bring veteran stories to light so that they are not lost or forgotten. They've got a lot of great titles available on their website, and I'd highly recommend checking them out. Every purchase gets poured back into their business, so more voices can be heard and more lives of service can be honored. I'm deeply grateful for them, to them for taking on my story, and I'm deeply grateful to the Silver Side for inviting me to come here and speak with you today. So. I believe I can open it up for questions if anybody has it.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Do you have some of that information in the book with the publishing website and Team RWB getting more information?
I'm not sure. So in the back of the book, there's like acknowledgements and some stuff. If you like Google A15 Publishing, you can find their website pretty easy. The name of the publisher is definitely in there. As far as the foundations, I think I have some on my blog, which is like hogwashwriting.com. So if you go there, you can find links to their pages as well.
So tell us about your writing process after everyone went to bed, and what would be the item that would inspire you to say, come up with a concept for one of the activities or one of the, events that you wanted to highlight?
So my process changed a lot because I basically started from scratch. I have no educational background aside from your basic writing courses. Part of my process to learn that, I picked up a lot of books on writing. I read Stephen King's book on writing, some books on writing by Ray Bradbury, just trying to absorb as much information as I could. As far as the determining scenes and how to go about that, it was easy for this book because I lived it. So I just kind of recalled the order of events and the things that I thought were the craziest things that kind of shaped the year. I think one of the most difficult parts was when I finally decided on what I wanted the overall theme of the story to be, was to work that in, because then you're dealing with the emotions of the characters and you have to make sure that the right people are in the right scenes. So it was a little bit more difficult when that aspect came in. I spent a lot of time, like I said, when I first sat down, I just started writing, and I got about 13 chapters in, and I was following 3 main characters, and it was a mess. I wasn't weaving the stories in very well, and I was like, I'm trying to do this way too complicated for a first novel. So at chapter 13, I took a break and I just started plotting out the rest of the book following one character. So I have a whiteboard that had sticky notes all over it. It looked like a serial killer's dream. But it was much easier once I narrowed down onto that one person, and I kind of melded those 3 stories, because once I got done with the final chapters, then I had to go back and completely rewrite the first 13 chapters because it was all over the place. But I was able to pull bits and pieces from things that I had already written and work them in just with this one new character as the main character. So.
What is your second book about, and when will that be ready?
So that's a good question. So my next book is tentatively called Sly Fox Hollow, and it's a story about a small West Michigan town where they have a mayor that has been mayor for 40 some years, and the mayor abruptly dies under mysterious circumstances, and the story follows the contentious mayoral election that follows. And then there's also, I weave in some of the legend of the Michigan Dogman. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it's a thing. There's actually a song about it. It's mostly up north where it's a little bit more popular, and I think it'll be interesting to people to hear that history, that Michigan history that a lot of people don't know about.
And when?
I didn't answer that on purpose. So like I said, I'm halfway through the 3rd draft. I messed up the first half of the first book. I don't like what I wrote for the second half of the first book, or second book. So I'm kind of in the rewriting process for that. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to use most of what I have, but I'm kind of reshaping it. So I'm hoping to be done with the 3rd and 4th draft by the end of the year, and then get it off to an editor, and then go the process from there. There's one thing I've learned about the publishing world: is a very, very slow moving process. So, yep.
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming out. You have been an incredibly wonderful speaker, and you've enlightened all of us so much. And I think that what you say will resonate with so many of the younger vets that we see coming through, and we appreciate that. And thank you for your service.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay.
Barely sweat.
No,
Yes, I remember that well. But it was a hard cement, a hard stone. Yeah, it just-
Pretty good looking.